Tonight on CBC Vancouver News.
Mr. Randhawa was an innocent victim of this homicide.
A case of mistaken identity in the Lower Mainland gang conflict. The victim in a deadly Delta shooting now deemed the wrong target. Also,
we must also look to the future and the flood and fire seasons that are ahead of us.
An ominous wildfire warning for BC and to prepare an expanded warning system in hopes of easing the devastation. And
if I can see it happen, sure, but words and action aren't always the same.
Promising affordability. Critics question Vancouver's plan to protect renters.
This is CBC Vancouver News.
Good evening. Thanks for joining us. I'm Anita Bathe. Tonight, a tragic case of mistaken identity. A BC corrections officer shot dead in broad daylight with hundreds of people nearby. Now, a year later, police believe the man was killed by mistake. Dan Burrett joins us live with more. Dan, this case had a lot of community reaction.
Immense grief for a family and for colleagues of 29-year-old Bikramdeep Randhawa, Anita. He was from Surrey. His family says the corrections officer had plans to join the RCMP eventually. On May 1st of last year, he was in the parking lot of Scottsdale Mall near 72nd and Scott Road. With other shoppers around, someone shot and killed the young man. Today, Delta police say investigators believe Randhawa was shot because his killers thought he was part of the Lower Mainland gang conflict. And the force says it's confident they've identified the suspects. CBC News spoke with Randhawa's brother a short time ago.
Well, I know this thing on the very first day anyways, because I know he wasn't involved in anything bad. But today, after hearing that, it gave me a bit more relief because there's no more questions on his reputation.
Randhawa's family and fellow corrections officers held a vigil for him shortly after he was killed last year. Delta police say combed through a lot of evidence over the last year, and in the last several weeks, officers narrowed it down to a case of mistaken identity and say they know who the real target was.
We have made contact with that individual who was involved in the Lower Mainland gang conflict, and they were notified that they were in fact the intended target of this homicide.
Police say it is tragic to see an innocent person caught up in senseless violence. It is still asking anyone with information about Bikramdeep Randhawa's killing to contact them. Anita.
Dan Burrett live tonight. Thank you. Well, the red-hot housing market in the Lower Mainland is showing signs of cooling off with drops in home sales. In Greater Vancouver, home sales have dropped to more typical levels in the last month, just 1.5% above the 10-year sales average. Home sales in April totaled more than 3,200. It's down from more than 4,900 in the same month last year, and from the previous month, March, it dropped by about 1,100. But over in the Fraser Valley, sales fell to a new low, 1,637 in April, and that's a drop of more than 35% since March. It was the first time in nearly 2 years that monthly sales fell below the 10-year average. This is while listings in that area increased by just under 15% from March. But Fraser Valley's real estate board says it's not likely this trend will continue.
It was just a pause, and they do happen all the time. I think it had a little bit to do with we were just coming into spring break and Easter, and everybody was getting an opportunity to do some travel and spend some time together.
Benz also says the uncertainty about interest rates is also giving potential home buyers pause. And despite the drop, this figure is still the 6th highest recorded on record. Well, the City of Vancouver is pledging to protect tenants from substantial rent increases in an area that could add 50,000 residents through development. The Broadway plan is just weeks away from being approved. And tonight, our John Hernandez is speaking with critics who say the promise of affordability could prove hard to keep.
The road closures and construction are a reminder to residents along the Broadway corridor of what's coming.
It's just going to be extremely dense, and the entire Vancouver landscape is changing.
With the subway construction underway, the city will soon review a final draft of the Broadway plan that looks to add space for as many as 50,000 new residents. But it's also raised questions around what will happen to tenants already living here.
To be clear, I want and expect a Broadway plan that includes the strongest renter protections in Canada and that prioritizes new social and rental housing.
Now, Vancouver's mayor is pledging amendments to the plan that would protect renters in the event that older buildings are demolished and redeveloped.
The relocation of tenants would be a rare event, but these folks would be fully compensated either with a cash payout or with a right to return to a new building at or below their current rents.
Stewart says displaced residents could return to redeveloped buildings and end up paying up to 20% below market rates, a big promise that's drawn skepticism from some in surrounding neighborhoods.
If I can see it happen, sure, but words and action aren't always the same.
Whether they follow through on that or not is a different story, but I think it's good.
Some housing experts are also scratching their heads, noting that newer buildings tend to have smaller units than older ones.
Are these going to be the similar size units? Are they going to be tiny units that really, I think, isn't necessarily coming out in the details of this plan, but yet I think it's going to have, a dramatic effect upon these types of rental neighborhoods. You got to remember that these are areas of the city that are anywhere between 30, 40, even 50% renters.
Details that are expected to emerge as the city gets into the final stages and makes a decision on a plan that will dramatically alter this city corridor for decades to come. John Hernandez, CBC News, Vancouver.
160 apartment units had to be evacuated this morning after a large fire tore through an Abbotsford building. Crews were called to the complex on Cardinal Avenue just after 6 a.m. It took hours to put out pockets of flames on the roof and contain the spread on the upper floors of the building. Neighboring businesses were also forced out.
It's a fairly large apartment block, and in fact, both apartment blocks are tied to the same underground parkade, so we're going to have a fair amount of folks displaced.
The city of Abbotsford hopes half the building's residents can return this evening. Those who aren't able to are being asked to check in at the Northview Church, where a reception center has been set up to provide emergency support. For the 18th straight month, more than 150 people have died in BC from the toxic drug crisis. March deaths hit 165. That's approximately 5.3 deaths a day. Fatalities fell in all health authorities except Fraser Health, but the death rate among those aged 40 to 59 climbed. BC's coroner says the number of people 50 and older dying due to toxic drugs has steadily increased in the past 6 years. It's a program that offers people an alternative to calling 911. And now BC's first civilian-led mobile crisis team is set to expand. But as Isabel Regan reports, some are still concerned about the program's relationship with police.
There are no branded vehicles, no sirens, no uniforms.
We'll come into the house, on their terms.
When someone in distress or a loved one calls the number for the Peer Assisted Care Team, or PACT, a mental health worker and a peer support worker are dispatched. The pair can provide support, resources, crisis counseling, and if needed, accompany someone to the hospital.
Knowing that if I'm in a crisis situation, I don't need to rush to emergency. I don't need to call 911. There is another option.
The Canadian Mental Health Association of BC says research shows 44% of people who rate their mental health as poor in this province would be unwilling to call 911 during a mental health crisis. Those running the program hope to see it evolve in the years to come.
We would be able to meet people in a more immediate way if we were integrated into 911.
Right now, the team responds to calls Thursday to Sunday from 6 p.m. to midnight, and the service is offered in English and Farsi. But a $1.26 million provincial boost for the program announced in April means the team is looking to expand operating hours to include more days of the week. That funding is also being used to launch in New Westminster and Victoria later this year. Police are not automatically involved in the calls, but they can be if there's sign of any danger attending a crisis.
It's not actually fully removing resources from police. It's a auxiliary police program, actually.
This Pivot Legal Society campaigner says while PACT has some promise, she's deeply concerned that the RCMP is involved in the program's development and at times in responses.
For a lot of people who've experienced trauma or have had previous experiences with the police, that uniformed officer showing up armed is already a trigger.
So far, PACT has answered to more than 270 crisis calls and texts since the soft launch in November.
A lot of the calls we've had have resulted in less 911 calls, so that's a success.
With hopes of even fewer 911 calls as the program expands. Isabel Regam, CBC News, Vancouver.
City engineers were in Gastown today repairing the iconic steam clock. On Saturday, vandals tried to smash the glass on the side of the clock. The original designer of the steam clock, 82-year-old Raymond Saunders, was there to oversee today's repairs. Police are trying to figure out if someone intentionally damaged the popular tourist attraction. The clock was built in 1977 as part of the city's effort to revive the historic downtown neighborhood. The BC government says it will invest $15 million to help refugees and other newcomers settle in the province. The funds are aimed at helping the thousands of mainly Ukrainian refugees who are expected to settle in BC over the coming months. The investment, which will be spent over 2 years, will be given to settlement organizations across the province.
We think this increase in funding and the number of people, the dramatic increase of number of people that will be able to be supported in BC, is significant, and we're grateful for the partnership that we have with those settlement agencies and the BC Ukrainian community in order to do this, because they're the ones that are going to be doing the work. We're just providing the support.
Settlement organizations have welcomed the support. Some say the province has doubled its contribution to help temporary residents settle in BC, and that the money will allow them to increase their capacity, improve language services, as well as provide better mental health and trauma support. With the spring season bringing heightened concerns about natural disasters, the province is expanding its emergency warning system. As Valpuri reports, it's going from tsunamis and amber alerts to also include threats from floods and wildfires.
Parts of BC have already been dealing with early wildfires. Since the start of April, there have been 90, with the majority of them in the Kamloops area.
Early spring fires are associated with human activities, really defined by the characteristics of that overwinter dead and dry fuels, grasses driven by windy conditions.
Last summer's wildfire season was devastating. Though only the third worst on record, many fires burned dangerously close to communities. By fall, catastrophic floodwaters rolled across homes and livelihoods.
We must also look to the future and the flood and fire seasons that are ahead of us.
To that end, BC is making changes to its emergency broadcast system. Alert Ready warns British Columbians of imminent hazards via intrusive messages on television, radio, and cell phones. Beyond tsunami warnings and amber alerts, starting now, it'll also broadcast threats of flooding. And next month,
the system will further expand to wildfire threats by early June.
Despite a generally cooler, wetter than normal spring, some parts of the province aren't getting enough rain.
Areas of concern for us that are starting to develop in below normal precipitation patterns is sort of parts of the southern Cariboo through Kamloops, the Okanagan, and even parts of the southeast corner of the province.
As well, the exceptional nature of last year's fire season has left dry conditions dry over the winter, despite numerous atmospheric river events across the province.
There just simply wasn't enough precipitation to fully reset those fuels. And so as we go into this season, that is something that we're going to be watching very closely.
Exactly what type of fire season BC can expect this summer is a challenge to predict, but early trends are developing in areas of the province where they are drier than experts would like to see at this time of year. Valpuri, CBC News, Vancouver.
And on that note, tomorrow the province will test the Alert Ready system. That test is happening at 1:55 p.m., so you might get an alert on your phone, or you should at least. Okay, a Richmond woman scammed out of almost $7,000 by a fake taxi operation got some good news from her bank today. Mindy Zimmering says she was just trying to help out when a young man approached her in a Richmond parking lot. The man asked her to use her debit card to pay for taxi fare, saying the cab operator wouldn't accept cash. He tapped the card and handed back what she thought was her card, but her bank contacted her soon, saying that 5 illegal transactions adding up to almost $7,000 were made. Zimmering says the bank has since returned her money. Richmond police say there have been at least 7 similar reports since April. A new video shows a group of BC's southern resident killer whales growing. Researchers with Washington State Center for Whale Research tell CBC the video shows K-pods swimming off the shores of the Oregon coast. Now, if you look closely, you can see K20, an adult female swimming with a small calf. The center tells CBC this is exciting news because K-pod has not had a new calf since 2011. Researchers hope to conduct a photo survey of the whales to confirm which whale is the calf's mother. Let's go now to meteorologist Johanna Wagstaffe. Joe, it's a lot of gray and rainy these days.
Well, Anita, I think at this point, we're at least getting used to showers with highs around 12 degrees. That's really our forecast for the next few days. Let me show you what things look like on the satellite and radar. We've got a general southwesterly flow, and that is going to be our story for the next 5 to 7 days. And that's going to continue to usher in systems from the Pacific. We've got a few of them to get through. This is almost a bit of an atmospheric river setup, but we're not seeing a huge plume of moisture. We did get into the steadier rain earlier this afternoon, but generally that train or that conveyor belt is going to carry in 2 to 3 low pressure systems over the next few days. So just taking you through to Wednesday overnight, you can see rainfall totals up towards the north coast of Vancouver Island and central coastal sections, 40 to 80 millimeters, but for Metro Vancouver, the next 48 hours, we're talking 10 to 20 millimeters. So not a lot of rain, but definitely look for more than just drizzle. Again, that southwesterly flow really dictating our weather for the next few days. We might see a bit of a break. Here we go tomorrow afternoon, and then again as we head into Thursday afternoon between systems. I think that's how we're going to take it. Breaks between systems for the next few days. As far as the interior goes, your temperature's coming down a little bit from the 20s you hit yesterday in the Okanagan. 18 for Cranbrook. You're always sort of half a day behind the weather in the southern interior, so you get the sunshine. 18 for you. Another 12 degrees in Prince George and Fort St. John, and yes, Prince Rupert catching the rain, heavy rain down towards Port Hardy. So look at the long range forecast. There we go, a series of 11 to 12 degree forecast days. I'll break it down. I just want to reveal the last day in this extended forecast. This is where we're really seeing signs of a strong high pressure. Now, there's good news there because that means warming and drying trend. We could be looking at an extended period of high teen temperatures and beyond. However, that is likely going to mark the start of the freshet. And because we do have a significant snowpack, all eyes will be on the spring melt again, sort of 7 to 10 days from now. Before then, though, getting through a very February, April-esque forecast, hoping for some sunshine Thursday afternoon between systems, but the showers return Friday, Saturday, Sunday, and they are pretty steady showers. Overnight lows, pretty seasonal. But yes, we're a good 4 to 5 degrees below that seasonal mark, again, until we hit early next Tuesday, and things do look to stick around. So watch for big pattern change in the long range. Until then, carry that umbrella handy. Anita?
Oh, you know it. Thanks, Joe. Turning to southern Manitoba now, where spring flooding continues to disrupt lives and strain resources. The full scale of the damage remains unclear, but the affected areas stretch over hundreds of kilometers. Here's Cameron McIntosh on where things stand in the hard-hit Peguis First Nation and other communities.
On some of Manitoba's lowest-lying land, Peguis First Nation is underwater. 700 homes damaged, more than 1,300 evacuees, many of them now in Winnipeg.
We got locked out of our reserve. Due to the flooding, we couldn't drive through the roads with our car, so we had to kind of just leave in a hurry.
We live at a family unit, so it's still rising.
Are you nervous?
Yeah, heck yeah.
All through Manitoba's Interlake region, water is forcing its way over land, blowing out roads and culverts. Danny Goodbertson still has his house. It's just getting to it.
I made a bridge to get across, and got lots of trees in the back, so I just keep cutting longer ones to make the bridge longer as it opens up.
Meanwhile, farmers are worried about fields too wet to seed or feed their livestock.
Hard on the cattle because there's not a dry spot for them to sit down on. Our hay is sitting in 1.5 feet of water.
This isn't the usual spring melt. That's already passed. But over 3 consecutive weekends, Manitoba got 6 times the usual April precipitation. Forecasts now predict the 4th largest flood in Manitoba history by volume.
Yes, it's a large flood, but the infrastructure has been modified since 1997.
Civil engineer and Manitoba flood expert Jay During says it's manageable, but this spring poses some big questions.
Should we be expecting 3 Colorado lows back to back in the future, or is it truly a freak event?
Winnipeg is being protected by its flood diversion channel. Still further south in the Red River Valley, the main highway south is closed. Morris is one of several communities closing in its dike.
I would say that it takes a resilient person to live in the Red River Valley, and we certainly have that in our community.
So far, the province is not calling a state of emergency. While back in Peguis, the federal government has deployed the Red Cross, as some call to send in the military.
We're working very closely together in effecting an appropriate response.
That's the CBC's Cameron McIntosh reporting tonight. There's also shock and anger over a draft leaked U.S. document that shows the legal right to get an abortion in that country could be about to fall. Reaction has been swift, including here in Canada, where our Canadian Minister of Families says American women will be able to get abortions here in this country if that happens. Renee Filipponi is looking at how both sides of the fight are responding.
Without these basic rights, women can't be free.
At rallies across the U.S. today, pro and con, Americans began to make sense of what this leaked decision could mean.
Abortion will not end. It will just become dangerous for women to have access to this. These are archaic rules that we're placing over women's bodies, and it's time for all of us to rise up.
In Miami, anti-abortion protesters joined the crowd.
As a sign says, abortion is murder, and I feel that way, period.
It's a debate that evokes a passionate and personal reaction, especially for those who've had an abortion.
It's extremely frustrating, and it's honestly a very difficult time. It's disheartening. We're working more than ever to make sure that people have the access that they need.
Emma Hernandez says some women will suffer more than others.
Abortion bans most directly impact Black and Brown communities, low-income communities, people who will face abortion bans, and they won't have the resources to travel out of state.
Both sides of the abortion debate have clashed in Linden, a small community in Washington state.
So this is great news for the people who care about the unborn.
Anti-abortion organizer Juanita Verbrie says today is a victory.
The left is having a frenzy right now because abortion is their sacrament, and they see it being challenged and possibly being taken off the books, which we've been working against and trying to actually, stop for 49 years.
But some of those cheering are cautious.
I'm not going to assume anything until we actually see the final opinion that comes down from the Supreme Court.
And even then, advocates for women's right to choose have made it clear they won't back down from this fight. Renee Filipponi, CBC News, Vancouver.
Let's look at the war in Ukraine now. Russia pulled out of the suburbs of Kyiv weeks ago, but Ukraine is still taking stock of the death and destruction the invaders left behind. David Common is speaking with survivors tonight as officials build a case for war crimes.
The horror of Bucha is in plain sight. The smell, too, seeping from unrefrigerated trailers outside its overflowing morgue. The body of Alona Razuvayeva's great-aunt is inside. Her uncle's is too. They were under Russian occupation. She died unable to get the medicine that would keep her alive. He from a bullet after Russians hauled him out of his apartment. I don't know what to do. I miss him, she tells us. They should be here. Many are instead here, buried. Sometimes the families in search of loved ones don't even know.
Sometimes we will show 1, 2, 3, 4 bodies.
Anna Dolan is a crisis psychologist.
200 bodies, we don't know who this, and no relatives.
There are scenes like this across Ukraine. Prosecutors here have a name for it: war crimes, and they're building their case.
They now say they have the evidence from autopsies and crime scenes documenting murder, rape, assaults, even naming suspects. But the key person is likely out of their grasp.
We all know who started this war, and this person is Vladimir Putin. Putin is the main war criminal of 21st century.
French crime scene investigators are here too, collecting DNA, determining cause of death, and documenting evidence of torture. Those who did this need to be punished, Alona tells us. This is now about bringing some dignity to the victims of horrific actions. David Coleman, CBC News, Bucha, Ukraine.
Late Montreal Canadiens icon Guy Lafleur is being remembered today for his kindness, humility, and his unique style, both on and off the ice. As Lafleur's casket arrived at the cathedral in Montreal, draped in his team's flag, fans yelled the same chant he heard throughout his remarkable career. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau and Quebec's premier were among those who attended the national funeral ceremony. Lafleur died last month at the age of 70 after a battle with lung cancer. Closer to home, an historic win for the Vancouver Giants last night after becoming the first 8th-seeded WHL team to knock off a top seed during playoffs. The Giants beat the Everett Silvertips 6-3 to clinch the series last night. The team had lost 11 of their final 12 regular season games, but grabbed the last playoff spot in the WHL's Western Conference by a single point. Vancouver will face the Kamloops Blazers in the conference semifinals that start this weekend. Okay, time to hop on a bandwagon. The Giants, the Blazers, perhaps the Abbotsford Canucks. Take your pick. Any local team except the Vancouver Canucks, of course. That being said, those NHL playoffs do have a bit of an impact on our broadcasts here at CBC Vancouver. Our shows this week are only online because of those games. So we will see you back here online tomorrow at 6 o'clock. Good night.